Coming up on Network Africa, the international community calls for restraint in Zimbabwe following Wednesday's post-election violence. Opposition candidates in Mali allege poll fraud ahead of the release of results. Exiled DR Congo opposition leader Moise Katumbi is to return home to launch his presidential bid. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Teniola Shibowale. We begin today in Zimbabwe, where the country is still waiting for the results from Monday's presidential election. Violence broke out in the capital on Wednesday, leaving 3 people dead as opposition MDC alliance supporters took to the streets to protest against alleged vote rigging. At the moment, soldiers have been patrolling the streets of the capital, and there are reports that the soldiers are telling people on the streets to go home.
This is the aftermath of the violent clashes between protesters and soldiers, which left at least 3 people dead in Zimbabwe's capital, Harare. Troops backed by armored vehicles opened fire on Wednesday to clear the streets of demonstrators who accused President Emmerson Mnangagwa's ruling ZANU-PF party of trying to rig Monday's presidential election.
Yesterday, we were exercising our right, because at a given point, we have to show the government that we need freedom.
The election results are not being announced properly. They have been delayed and the figures don't tally with the numbers on the biometric voter registration. And this is what caused the protest.
Many shops were closed and pavements quiet by Thursday morning, with several streets still strewn with rocks and the charred remains of fires. The deployment of soldiers and the shooting and beating of unarmed protesters is likely to set back efforts to end Zimbabwe's pariah status in the wake of the army's removal of longtime leader Robert Mugabe in a coup last November.
We ended up having to lose people's lives. That is not good for the country. If there are demonstrations, then they have to be peaceful for the country, so that we move on as a nation and we progress in peace and tranquility. At the end of the day, we have to accept the outcome of the elections.
The website of the Election Commission, which is expected to start announcing presidential election results soon, was offline in the morning after being taken out by unidentified hackers overnight.
Meanwhile, President Emmerson Mnangagwa has promised a dialogue with the opposition MDC party, which he blames for instigating the violence. Opposition candidate Nelson Chamisa says he won the vote and the result is being rigged to give the president victory. However, the Electoral Commission denies there is any rigging and says people should wait patiently for the results.
Zimbabwe's President Emmerson Mnangagwa expressed his condolences to the victims of the violence and called for an independent investigation in a series of tweets. The Zimbabwean president also warned that his government will not tolerate a repeat of the chaos that erupted on Wednesday. Meanwhile, a spokesperson for the country's opposition, Movement for Democratic Change Alliance, says the Zimbabwean army's reaction in quelling disturbances in the capital was disproportionate and unjustified.
Today we saw the deployment of military tanks and firing of live ammunition on civilians for no apparent reason. Civilians are allowed to demand the respect of their rights in a lawful manner. Any disorder may be dealt with by the police, who are best trained for public order. Soldiers are trained to kill during war. We are seriously made to wonder what this means. Are we in war? Are civilians the enemy of the state? The loss of lives is the most painful experience we ever get subjected to.
Earlier, The leader of the opposition movement for democratic change, Nelson Chamisa, said on Twitter that he had won the popular vote in Monday's election, in which he challenged Mugabe's successor, Emmerson Mnangagwa, from the ruling ZANU-PF party. President Mnangagwa also took to Twitter, calling for calm and urging patience before the results were announced.
Let's get more on this story now from a Zimbabwean journalist, Nigel Nyamumtumbu. Nigel, what is the situation like in the capital at the moment?
Well, it's now generally calm, peaceful, with the central business district virtually empty. There is minimum movement by people. There is minimum normal business activity happening. There is still very much visible presence of police, visible presence of military police, and virtually the streets of Harare are empty. In other parts of the country, there have been minor protests, particularly in urban areas, urban Bulawayo, urban Gweru, which are strongholds and areas that the opposition command support. There have been some peaceful demonstrations with minimum reports of any form of violence.